Right, we are recording. Nicola, I think you're going to love the theme of today's episode. We're going to be talking about a simple view of writing. There's nothing quite like a graphical representation of a literacy process, is there?
I agree.
So we've been working our way through a series on the 2025 writing framework, and you can check out the other episodes we've recorded if you're yet to do so. And today we turn our attention to the simple view of writing. We're going to digest what it is exactly, what it means for our pupils, and we'll also consider strategies for getting the most out of it. This show is for English teachers of any description. My name is Sam Denno and I'm a secondary English specialist at Twinkle. I've worked in schools and classrooms and I've innovated in educational publishing for the last 16 years. And as we've alluded to, I'm joined by Nicola Romaine. What's your background?
So I taught for a number of years across all of primary, actually, from reception up to year 6. I was deputy head teacher and I was English lead and assessment lead for a number of years before becoming a English advisor across the North Wales Consortium. So for the past kind of like decade, really, I've worked for educational publishers in advisory and sort of subject expert roles.
You're really experienced.
So are you.
So we're going to be dwelling on two key skills in this episode, transcription and composition, which are the subjects of the simple view of writing. But before we talk about how the simple view of writing works, I wonder if you're able to provide definitions, Nicola, for what is meant by transcription and composition.
Okay, well, what it boils down to it, Sam, at its heart, transcription is the physical mechanics of writing. So getting the words onto the page, quite simply, that covers spelling and handwriting and even typing skills, which we've got to consider as well, of course. And then composition, on the other hand, is the intellectual side of things. So it's that process of generating ideas and selecting vocabulary and structuring sentences to convey meaning. So essentially, transcription is the how, and composition is the what. So
what exactly are we talking about with the simple view of writing? So as in a previous episode, I'm going to attempt to describe here a graphical concept via a very non-visual medium of podcasting. So come with me, if you will, in imagining a graph with a horizontal axis and a vertical axis that cross in the middle. Could be like religious symbolism. It's a cross. And along that horizontal axis, we're tracking transcription skills with poor to good, mapped from left to right. Along the vertical axis, we're tracking composition skills with poor to good, tracked from bottom to top. And we could plot any learner somewhere on this graph.
It's a really powerful visual, isn't it? So when you see it plotted out, it becomes clear that, a learner isn't just a bad writer. Instead you might see someone with incredible imagination who is stuck in that bottom right quadrant because their fine motor skills or spelling are holding them back. So it allows us to be much more surgical with our support. So when you consider working memory, the simple view is actually, quite profound. So in early writers, transcription isn't automatic and a child has to use most of their brain power just to remember how to form a letter or how to spell. And because their working memory is full of transcription tasks, they have no space left for that composition. So the goal, is that we practice transcription until it becomes automatic. And once a pupil can spell and write without thinking about it, their full cognitive energy is freed up for that creative and complex composition.
And and I'm glad that you brought in that working memory thing as well, because that's critical here, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because it is two skills that the brain is having to, or it's more than two skills really, but different functions that the brain is having to sort of draw from. The main point is this, that transcription and composition represent the two most important pillars of becoming a competent writer. And we want all of our learners to be able to transcribe and to compose well. If they're effective at both, then they'll be able to express their ideas in writing fluently and with automaticity. So they may be developing into competent transcribers with well articulated handwriting form, but then they might still be struggling with sentence composition. And similarly, they may have a good vocabulary for oral composition, but they could struggle with producing transcript that is legible enough to read. And it says, as you've sort of pointed out before, sort of broadly speaking, transcription is the more physical side of things, whereas composition is the more ideas side of things.
You've got that executive function as well, haven't you?
It depends which research you read, doesn't it? But different writers will sort of talk about bringing that executive function as well as part of this view of writing.
So, self-regulation, executive function, so that's the manager of the brain, and that obviously involves, planning and reviewing and goal setting. That turns the simple view, if you like, into a triangle.
The simplest form is that transcription composition, but there is that third strand there as well. We spoke about the importance of teachers being able to articulate the process of learning to write the last time that you and I recorded a session. Do you think that this is an effective model for understanding how the writing process works?
I do, because, it stops us from feeling overwhelmed, I guess. Writing is incredibly complex, but by splitting it into those two domains, it becomes more manageable. It helps teachers to realise that if a child's handwriting is laboured, then, their cognitive load is being used up by transcription, allowing for no room for that high-level composition. It really helps teachers to explain or to understand the why behind that struggle.
And that is one of the real benefits of using the simple view of writing, because it works as a diagnostic tool for identifying those distinct skill gaps in writing, rather than a teacher attempting to sort of tackle writing in its entirety, although there is a place for that as well, which we'll come to, I think, in a minute. Would it be common practice in primary schools for a teacher to literally plot their class across the graph, or do you think that it's intended more as a model to hold in mind when assessing writing abilities?
And particularly with the simple view of reading, actually, which I've probably done a lot more around in my career. And, I hear myself now, advising teachers to kind of plot children on the simple view of reading in order to kind of decide what kind of interventions they might need. But I think for most, really, it's that mental framework, isn't it? Used during sort of marking or moderation, for an intervention lead or a Senko, literally plotting learners can be a game changer. So I think that there is value in, depending on the role or depending on the purpose of doing that, I think there is definitely value in doing that, in order to help group pupils for targeted kind of, interventions and booster sessions, as I mentioned. But yeah, I think across the board, I think in general terms, it's probably more of a kind of like something to have in mind when you're marking. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, for intervention purposes, if you've got 5 children in the same quadrant, for example, whether that's mentally or actually plotted on the graph with their names literally on the paper, you know exactly then, don't you, what that small group needs, rather than having a sort of generic writing prompt for the whole class. So I think it's useful for both purposes.
What I've seen done really effectively, I think I've seen some work that you've done around this, and certainly there are other people within the business at Twinkle who've done this, where they've plotted not the pupils on the graph, but the possible interventions on that simple view of reading graph. And that's a really brilliant way of saying, okay, well, not only what is the need, but what is the solution to the need as well. And we can plot the solutions on across that simple view of writing graph.
That's right. And of course, we're a commercial organisation at the end of the day. And I think when it comes to product and resources, that also helps us to kind of articulate to our customers what products as well might support different needs within the simple view of writing quadrant. But yeah, I think that's really useful on a school level as well, actually, is, whatever resources, whether they're human resources, physical resources, whatever it is you've got within English, for example, or beyond English, to support the different needs that might occur within that simple view of writing. I think it really helps to have a really clear understanding, to be able to articulate to other staff members, whoever is supporting pupils in that setting, what might really work to support that particular need.
Let's talk about other strategies though. So if a pupil falls into that top left quadrant on the graph, then that suggests they've got good language composition but poor transcription skills. What can we do for them?
Okay, so there are pupils, as we know, who talk like Shakespeare but write like a toddler. And for them, we need to reduce that transcription barrier. That might mean using speech to text software or providing word banks, that scaffold to help them with spelling, or allowing them to dictate their ideas to a scribe first, so that the composition isn't lost whilst they really struggle with the pen, with the physical act of writing.
And then on the other hand, if they can be plotted into the bottom right quadrant on the graph, so that tells us they've got good transcription skills, they can do the physical stuff, but poor language composition. What can we do for those pupils?
So these pupils definitely need support with scaffolded ideation. So, we can use sentence starters, slow writing techniques where we dictate the purpose of each sentence, or visual prompts to help them to build a narrative. All of those things are really, really great to be able to build up that kind of mental model, and that kind of mental composition, if you like. We're essentially trying to sort of jumpstart their creative engine. So already, whilst we're talking, you can actually see how different, can't you? Those different, or pupils that sit within those different quadrants, how varying their needs actually are. So already, hopefully, we're articulating the real usefulness of that sort of simple view model.
In your experience, if they struggle with both elements, so let's put them in that bottom left quadrant, we have touched on this already, but should we tackle transcription and composition all at once, or is it more effective to break it down into the modular skills again and train each area separately?
Well, that Berninger research, it's really vital, isn't it? Because it reminds us that whilst we diagnose them separately, we shouldn't keep them in silos forever. We definitely don't want to be doing that, do we? If we only ever teach them separately and only ever teach them what the simple view tells us them, at that given time that they need, how do we move them forwards? How do they progress? So, if we only ever teach them separately, pupils will struggle to bridge the two different aspects. And the magic happens when we teach a specific spelling pattern, for example, and then immediately ask them to use those words in a creative sentence. It's about building that automaticity, and then when both gears turn together smoothly. So it's bringing them together and knowing actually when to bring them together. And I suppose it's that kind of gradual release model as well, isn't it, within that? So it's almost like doing it really, really slowly, bringing them together really, really slowly and building the momentum up until they're ready to kind of fly really on their own. In the early stages of writing, a pupil's working memory is often overwhelmed by transcription, as we know. We've covered that, haven't we? We know that they need to be able to be fluent in transcription to release them, to be able to cognitively, to be able to get their ideas down on paper, which is basically what we're talking about. And that gradual release model allows the teacher to borrow the pupil's cognitive load by handling the difficult parts initially. So the teacher does a lot of that modelling and a lot of that kind of handling, doing the heavy lifting, allowing the pupil then to focus on kind of one pillar at a time. And I think if we can do that, if we can get that right, then I think we're flying, really.
Yeah, so you mentioned the Berninger research, Berninger et al., their research entitled Teaching Spelling and Composition Alone and Together, Implications for the Simple View of Writing. And as you suggest, they discovered that while teaching explicit spelling and composition skills in isolation was effective for improving those respective skills, but together, teaching them together, was more effective for raising standards across both skills in their entirety. So you talk about transcription and the cognitive load of transcription. When we think about just imagination and sort of letting free with your imagination, that's less of a cognitive load thing, is it? Or can that be as difficult?
It depends where you're sitting on the quadrant, doesn't it, Sam? You know, just rewinding a little bit to what we were talking about, the different quadrants before. There are pupils, aren't there, that, you know, are fluent in transcription, but they really, really struggle to generate ideas, basically, don't they? If that's what you're asking me.
Yeah, so that has that same sort of cognitive burden as transcription could have.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. And what a fantastic model to support teachers, really it is. You know, if we talked about, didn't we, whether, you know, how to actually use it in practice in the classroom, you know, the simple view of writing, you know, the two axis, you know, how do we actually use it? Well, whether we use it as a kind of mental model to kind of, you know, gather our thoughts and ideas around different pupils' strengths and weaknesses as we actually mark their work or talk to them and gather their feedback, you know, that formative assessment, or whether we're actually using it, you know, as a document where we're plotting names on it, it's still going to yield really, really fantastic insights into pupils' strengths and weaknesses, isn't it? So whether that is transcription or whether that is composition or whether it is neither particularly, which is great for the pupil, I think it's equal in its usefulness with regards to whether that's a transcription struggle or whether it's a composition struggle. But I definitely still think that that gradual release kind of model framework, I do, we do, you do structure works really, really well for both transcription and composition focus.
Yeah, okay.
Have I lost you?
No, not at all. It's so easy. What loses me is the fact that, I suppose, and this is where we have to kind of distance ourselves from the privilege that we might have existed within as English teachers, because of course, as English teachers, these things probably, for the majority of us, will have come to us really, really naturally. So to say, kind of imagine a thing, come up with the story, well, that's like second nature. Of course I can do that. And a lot of this stuff is where you have to look at it and think, these young people are learning in a very different way to me, and it's an empathy thing as well, isn't it? Sort of understanding that different people are coming from things in a different way. As always, Nicola, you have been an absolute fountain of knowledge, and so thank you for your conversation today.
That's okay. It's lovely to talk to you again, Sam.
Thanks to everyone for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, then feel free to email twinklepod@twinkle.co.uk. We love likes, we love follows, and we love 5-star ratings. That's how we get the news spread that we exist. And that's all. Goodbye for now.